March 1943, the Atlantic Ocean. The war under the sea was at its peak ferocity. Allied convoys crossing the ocean were the lifeblood sustaining the fight against Nazi Germany, and the U-boats of the Kriegsmarine were the sharks severing those lines. On the command bridge of the submarine USS Sawfish, Lieutenant Commander James Jim O'Malley, 42, a veteran commanding officer with nearly 20 years of undersea experience, stood watching the dark waves through his binoculars. He wasn't looking for U-boats. He was trying to avoid them. The mission of the Sawfish and other Allied submarines in the Battle of the Atlantic was not to hunt, but to escort and protect the convoys. It was a defensive, reactive mission, and in O'Malley's view, it was a catastrophic waste of the tremendous potential of these nuclear submarines. The problem facing the Allied Navy was a brutal technological puzzle. The German U-boats, especially the Type 7s, had become extremely adept at evasion. They operated in wolf packs, coordinating attacks on convoys. The key to their success lay in their stealth. Underwater. The primary method for detecting submarines was passive sonar, essentially giant underwater microphones, listening for the sounds of enemy propellers and machinery. The U-boats were designed to be very quiet, and German captains were masters of silent running, shutting down all non-essential machinery, and moving at a crawl to minimize noise. Allied submarines, like the Sawfish's Gatto class, were much noisier machines. Their machinery, drive systems, and even the flow of water around their hulls created a distinct acoustic signature that U-boat sonar operators could hear from miles away. In this game of cat and mouse, the U-boat mice could hear the cat coming from a long way off and easily slip away into the darkness of the deep ocean. This failure was measured in horrific casualty figures. Millions of tons of merchant shipping and thousands of Allied sailors had sunk to the bottom of the sea in 1942 and early 1943. It was called the Happy Time by the U-boat captains. O'Malley had witnessed this devastation firsthand. He had seen ships laden with supplies and essential military equipment torpedoed, sinking in just minutes. He had heard the desperate cries for help over the radio, and he felt a profound helplessness. His ship, with its torpedoes and well-trained crew, almost never had a chance to confront the real enemy. They were always too late, or if they were nearby, the U-boats would vanish into the darkness before the Sawfish could get within firing range. Standard tactics were useless. Running at high speed to chase a detected target created so much noise it alerted the enemy. Stalking passively meant you almost never found the enemy in the first place. They were fighting a war where the rules seemed to have been written by the opponent. O'Malley's frustration peaked one pitch-black night when the Sawfish was ordered to escort a critical convoy. Just hours after sunset, the first torpedoes hit. No warning, no sonar detection, just brilliant explosions and deafening roars in the night. As the Sawfish raced to the scene, their sonar picked up only faint, distant sounds, the propellers of the retreating U-boats. O'Malley ordered a pursuit, but it was a hopeless effort. The U-boats were gone, blended into the vast expanse of the ocean. When dawn broke, it illuminated a scene of carnage, burning and sunken cargo ships, lifeboats adrift on the oil-slicked sea, and survivors clinging to wreckage. As the Sawfish's crew joined the rescue effort, O'Malley retreated to his small cabin. He stared at the bulkhead, his heart heavy with frustration and anger. Something had to change. They couldn't keep fighting this way. They needed a completely new approach, something the Germans couldn't anticipate. He opened his technical notebook and began to sketch, not a new weapon, but a new philosophy of undersea warfare. It would not be based on superior power or speed, but on absolute stealth. He called the concept absolute stealth running. O'Malley's absolute stealth running concept wasn't just about turning off a few pumps or moving slowly. It was a comprehensive philosophy that required a complete redesign of how a submarine operated in a combat environment. He started with the most basic source of noise, the ship itself. He spent weeks, along with his chief petty officer, Mike O'Brien, going through every corner of the Sawfish, listening. They listened to the vibration of the diesel engines, the whine of the generators, the hum of the cooling pumps, the click of the relays, and even the sound of water flowing along the hull. O'Malley carefully documented every noise source, classifying them by frequency and intensity. His key insight was this: a submarine is never truly silent. The challenge is to make its noise blend into the natural background sound of the ocean, the songs of whales, the cracking of ice, undersea earthquakes, and the endless roar of the waves. The first step was vibration isolation. O'Malley and O'Brien led the crew in a secret and unauthorized project dismantling the main engine mounts and installing thick rubber pads, handcrafted from old truck tires and other elastic materials. They called this sneakers for the engines. Next, they focused on the pumps and ventilation fans, which produced a high-frequency noise that was particularly easy to detect. They built soundproof boxes of wood and padding, encasing these noisiest pieces of equipment. Every metal pipe that touched the hull was lined with canvas or rubber to stop noise from being transmitted. They even developed new operating procedures instead of using noisy hydraulic pumps to operate the rudders and control surfaces. They switched to the manual control system during hunting scenarios, a physically demanding but almost completely silent task. They set strict speed limits. Predator speed was 2 knots, slow enough that the propellers wouldn't cause cavitation, the formation, and collapse of vacuum bubbles, which creates a loud, distinctive clicking sound like a bucket of marbles being shaken underwater. However, O'Malley's true innovation was tactical, not just mechanical. He realized that even a near-silent ship was useless if it operated in predictable patterns. He abandoned traditional submarine hunting methods entirely. Instead of actively searching for U-boats with active sonar which would instantly alert the enemy to their presence, he proposed a completely passive method. The Sawfish would become a rock, a part of the seabed. They would position themselves near known shipping lanes, shut down all non-essential machinery, and simply listen. The entire crew would go into absolute silent mode. No talking, no unnecessary movement, no dropped tools. They would use their passive sonar as a giant pair of ears, scanning the ocean for the faintest sound of a U-boat's propellers or machinery. When a potential target was identified, instead of racing to attack, they would wait. They would let the U-boat come to them, using ocean currents and slow, silent movements to adjust their position for a kill shot. This was a fundamental departure from doctrine. Instead of being the active hunter, they would become the ambusher. They would be the trap. O'Malley presented this detailed plan to his senior officers in a closed-door meeting. The reaction was skepticism. One officer said, "You're proposing we sit still and hope the enemy runs into us. That's madness, O'Malley. Now, that's not how the United States Navy wages war." But O'Malley persisted, arguing with his calculations and research. Finally, he was given one chance at test mission, with the warning that if it failed, his career was over. The test mission was assigned in May 1943. The USS Sawfish was ordered to patrol a large area in the central Atlantic known as the Black Pit, a key transit route for U-boats moving from their bases in France to the rich hunting grounds in the West. Normally, such a mission would involve constant surface running to charge batteries, active sonar sweeps, and high-speed attacks. This time, everything would be different. As soon as they reached their target coordinates, O'Malley gave the order to dive. Instead of moving, he took the ship down to a deep thermal layer, where a change in temperature and salinity created a natural cloaking layer, a phenomenon that could bend and absorb sonar waves. At 400 feet, they shut everything down. The main engines went silent. The auxiliary generators stopped. The ventilation system fell quiet. Even the emergency lighting was doused, leaving the crew in near total darkness, broken only by the dim red glow of the essential panels for sonar and navigation. The silence became overwhelming, almost oppressive. People whispered, if they had to speak at all. They moved carefully, one step at a time, avoiding bumping into anything. They became part of the ocean. 2 days passed with nothing. The tension mounted. The younger officers began to show their skepticism. Then, on the afternoon of the third day, a sound appeared. At first, it was just a distant hum, almost lost in the background noise of the sea. But it was getting closer. The sonar man, a 19-year-old named Jenkins, put on his headphones and signaled. He listened intently, his hands delicately adjusting the dials. "Commander," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "I hear propellers, slow speed, probably a Type 7, bearing 270. O'Malley nodded, his face impassive. This was the moment of truth. Standard procedure would be to start the engines and charge in for the attack. But O'Malley did not. Instead, he ordered maintain position. Absolute silence. Give me his every move. Jenkins continued to report, painting a picture of the U-boat moving above them. It was patrolling confidently, completely unaware of the Sawfish's presence below. O'Malley, using his knowledge of the currents and extraordinary navigation skills, ordered the crew to use the near-silent electric maneuvering thrusters to slowly rotate the ship, bringing the bow torpedo tubes to bear on the target. They moved at the speed of a snail, an inch at a time. The process took over an hour. The U-boat, completely blind to the silent threat, crossed their sights. The range closed 2,000 yards, 1,500 yards, 1,000 yards. This was a distance at which the U-boat's sonar would have certainly detected them if they were making any significant noise. But they remained silent. Finally, the U-boat was in a perfect position, a 90-degree angle, an easy shot. "Fire one," O'Malley ordered, his voice low and calm. A torpedo slid from the tube with a gentle whoosh, then a second. The crew held its breath. 40 seconds of agonizing silence passed. Then, 2 massive explosions in quick succession reverberated through the hull. The sound of the U-boat's propellers vanished, replaced by the gruesome sound of tearing metal and escaping air. They had done it. They had killed a U-boat without ever being detected. There was no cheering, just quiet nods and knowing glances. O'Malley ordered them to clear the area, using the current and minimal propulsion to slip away from the scene, leaving the crippled U-boat to sink into the abyss. His method had worked. News of the Sawfish's success spread quickly through naval circles. But it was cloaked in a thick veil of secrecy. The official report simply noted the destruction of an enemy U-boat, but the senior officers at Submarine Commander, Submarine Force Atlantic, knew something unusual had happened. How had the Sawfish, a noisy Gato-class submarine, managed to approach and destroy a sophisticated Type 7 U-boat without being detected. O'Malley was ordered to present his tactics in detail to a board of admirals and senior technical officers. The presentation took place in a top-secret briefing room at the New London submarine base. The initial reaction was deep skepticism. One old admiral growled, "O'Malley, you're describing turning an attack submarine into a reef. This isn't warfare. This is loitering." However, as O'Malley presented his data, the comparative sound recordings, the detection rate calculations, and most importantly, the actual results, the mood in the room began to change. One technical officer, Vice Admiral Samuel Fletcher, who had been a submarine engineer before the war, saw the potential. "You're talking about completely changing the balance of power," Fletcher said, his voice low. "If this can be replicated." The decision was made at the highest level. O'Malley's absolute stealth running method would not be widely distributed. Instead, it would be classified as top secret and deployed only by a hand-picked squadron of submarines under the command of officers trained directly by O'Malley. The reason was fear that if the tactic became known, the Germans would quickly develop countermeasures. This had to be a closely guarded weapon. O'Malley was tasked with forming a special unit, Tactical Development Submarine Squadron, a DevSubron 5, a vague name to hide its true activities. Over the following months, he worked tirelessly to refit a small group of submarines, mostly Gato and Balao classes, installing the isolated engine mounts, soundproofing systems, and training the crews in the new techniques of silence. The sailors were taught how to move, how to communicate with complex hand signals, and, most importantly, patience. They learned to be patient predators, hiders in the dark. The effect of Squadron 5 on the battlefield was almost immediate and profound. While conventional Allied submarines still struggled to find and kill U-boats, O'Malley's silent subs began to rack up astonishing victories. They would position themselves along U-boat transit routes, often near the Strait of Gibraltar or off the west coast of France, and wait. Using their advanced passive sonar, they could hear the U-boats coming from great distances, often before the U-boats themselves could detect any threat. After-action reports from captured German sailors began to mention a terrifying phenomenon, ghost attacks. They would be hit by torpedoes from nowhere, with no sonar warning, no sound of an enemy engine. To them, it seemed the ocean itself had turned against them. Confusion and fear spread through the U-boat force. Squadron V's kill rate was 5 times higher than that of conventional Allied submarines. Their tactics had rendered Germany's active, sonar-based hunting methods obsolete. They weren't just killing U-boats, they were killing the U-boat fleet's morale. The proof of their effectiveness was clearest in these statistics. By the end of 1943, the darkest period of the Battle of the Atlantic was over. Merchant shipping losses plummeted, and U-boat kill rates soared. The contribution of Squadron 5 to this victory was decisive, but entirely secret. After the war, the contributions of James O'Malley and Tactical Development Submarine Squadron 5 were quickly buried in classified archives as the Cold War began. Absolute stealth running technology suddenly became more critical than ever. Now, the threat was no longer Germany's diesel-electric U-boats, but the new and extremely quiet nuclear submarines of the Soviet Union. The principles O'Malley had pioneered vibration isolation, hydrodynamic noise reduction, and, most importantly, the tactical philosophy of silence and patience became the foundation for the entire U.S. submarine building program. New nuclear attack submarines like the Skipjack and later the Los Angeles classes were designed from the keel up to be quiet. Their hulls were shaped for optimal hydrodynamics to reduce flow noise. Their steam turbines and drive components were set on complex, isolated mounts. Their outer surfaces were covered in special rubber tiles, known as anechoic coating, to absorb sonar waves instead of reflecting them. They were the embodiment of the vision O'Malley had sketched in his notebook on the Sawfish. O'Malley himself was honorably discharged, but bound by a strict oath of secrecy, he returned to civilian life, never to speak publicly about his revolutionary contributions. He worked as a consulting engineer in the shipbuilding industry, but even in that role, he could never fully reveal the extent of his knowledge. To the public, he was just another former submarine officer. The records of Squadron 5 and its tactics remained tightly classified throughout the Cold War. Declassification only began slowly in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union. Even then, the full story was not told. It would take decades more, through Freedom of Information Act requests and the persistence of historians, for the full scale of O'Malley's contribution to be recognized. James O'Malley's true legacy lies not just in the U-boats he sank, or even in the modern submarine designs shaped by his principles. It lies in a fundamental shift in the philosophy of undersea warfare. He proved that in the underwater environment, where visibility is zero and sound is everything, absolute stealth is worth far more than speed or firepower. He changed the goal from being the fastest predator to being the quietest. His ambush tactic, once ridiculed by traditional naval officers, is now standard doctrine for attack submarines worldwide. Every modern military submarine, whether American, Russian, or Chinese, carries within it a piece of the legacy from O'Malley's daring experiments in World War II, the story of a determined submarine commander who defied dogma and invented a new form of warfare, only to be obscured by secrecy for half a century, is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important innovations come not from government labs or well-funded committees, but from the insight and courage of individuals willing to see the world differently. James O'Malley didn't just make the U-boat obsolete, he forever shaped the future of undersea warfare, a legacy as silent as the ships he taught to hide.